The streets of San Francisco were cold that January morning, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones even when you were bundled up in scarves and thick jackets. The fog rolled in from the bay, creeping along the sidewalks and curling around the corners of the city like a restless shadow. In a small, tidy neighborhood where houses leaned slightly to one side and the mailboxes wore rust like battle scars, 12-year-old Sophia Chen was already awake. She moved through her home with the ease of someone who knew every nook and sound. The faint creak in the hallway floor, the way the radiator groaned when the heat kicked in, the hum of the refrigerator that never quite stayed silent. Sophia's life was ordinary in many ways, yet anyone who knew her could tell there was a quiet intensity to her. She loved books, but not just the stories. They were maps, windows into lives she imagined she might live. She liked drawing. Her sketches full of intricate patterns and tiny details that most adults would dismiss, but to her, they were alive, breathing in the way she felt the world. She was smart, precocious even, but never arrogant. Her smile had a softness, a hint of mischief, the kind that made neighbors comment on how bright and observant she was. Her mother, Mei Chen, was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast, humming under her breath a tune Sophia didn't recognize but liked nonetheless. The smell of toasted bread and scrambled eggs mixed with the faint perfume of fresh coffee. Mei glanced at her daughter, taking in the familiar curl of her hair, the freckle just above her lip that Sophia always tried to hide. "Hurry up, Sophia," she said, voice gentle but firm. "You don't want to be late for school." Sophia grabbed her backpack, a patchwork of stickers and worn edges, and gave her mother a quick smile. "I won't be," she said, her voice steady, though there was a flutter of excitement underneath. That day, like any other, seemed routine, but sometimes even in the most ordinary moments, the threads of danger begin to twist quietly. Walking to school, Sophia passed familiar faces, the neighbor walking his dog, the bus driver waving at kids lining up, the old man who sold newspapers from a wooden cart. Yet, in the periphery, shadows moved differently. A woman across the street paused longer than necessary, her eyes following Sophia just a beat too long. A car drove slowly by, windows tinted, engine idling as if waiting. Sophia didn't notice, not yet, but the world was starting to shift around her in ways she couldn't see. School was the usual chaos of ringing bells and lockers slamming. Sophia's friends chattered about homework and weekend plans, their laughter a comforting soundtrack to the ordinary. But Sophia had always been observant. She noticed small things others didn't. The teacher's watch that always ran a minute slow, the flicker of a light in the corner of the hallway that seemed off, the way a janitor lingered near the library longer than needed. At the time, none of it meant anything to her, just quirks. Later, investigators would pore over these details and wonder if they were clues, if someone had been there, watching, waiting. By lunchtime, Sophia had settled into her favorite spot in the cafeteria, a place near the window where the sunlight fell in diagonal lines across the table. She ate quickly, finishing her sandwich, then pulled out a notebook, drawing little sketches. A cat perched on a roof, clouds shaped like faces, a girl holding a lantern in a dark forest. She drew slowly, deliberately, as if each line mattered, each shadow a story. The bell rang for second period, and Sophia packed her notebook away, ready to face math and science. Her friends trailed behind, laughing about an incident in gym class. Sophia walked alone for a moment, glancing up at the sky, noticing how the fog seemed to press against the tall buildings. Something in her chest tightened, not fear exactly, just an awareness. Sometimes she felt the world watching back. That day, it was more pronounced, though she couldn't name why. After school, Sophia's route home took her through a quieter street lined with townhouses and small shops. The fog thickened as the afternoon waned, and the city took on a softer, more mysterious quality. A delivery man wheeled his cart past, a dog barked in the distance, the hum of traffic softened by the mist. It was ordinary, and yet, beneath it, the city seemed to hold its breath. Sophia noticed the woman again, the same one from the morning, though she couldn't be certain. The woman wore a long coat, dark gloves, and a scarf that obscured her face. She seemed to be walking in the same direction, though Sophia thought she was imagining it. Children often imagine patterns, see connections where none exist. But this woman lingered at a corner, pausing, looking down the street before moving on. At home, Mei Chen was preparing dinner when Sophia arrived. Her father, David, greeted her at the door with a tired but warm smile. The family settled into their routine. Talk about the day, homework, small arguments over chores, laughter here and there. But even in this warmth, the narrative of what was to come began to thread itself subtly. The days that followed mirrored this one: school, drawing, family dinners, small walks in the neighborhood. Yet, in the background, the city's pulse carried a quiet tension. Strangers who watched, patterns unnoticed, moments that later investigators would see as part of a chain leading to the unthinkable. It's often the smallest things, the faintest impressions, that become the threads investigators pull years later when trying to understand how someone vanished from the world without a sound. Sophia's friends and teachers would later remember her as lively, intelligent, full of curiosity. Her parents would recall her warmth, her laughter, the way she pressed herself against them in hugs that seemed to absorb worry. But beneath all of this normalcy, in the folds of her routine, there were unseen eyes, choices made in silence, and a world outside her knowledge that was starting to close in. Even now, recalling that time, it's impossible not to feel the tension in the ordinary, the way a morning fog hides things until they suddenly appear, the way a street looks calm until it isn't, the way life itself can feel stable and safe until it shatters. For Sophia, those days were filled with hope, curiosity, and the gentle rhythms of childhood. And yet, in those same days, somewhere in the mist of San Francisco, someone was paying attention, someone who would intersect her life in a way that would change it forever. By the end of that week, nothing seemed amiss to her friends or family. Sophia continued her routines, drawings, and homework. She told jokes at the dinner table, complained about the cold on her walk to school, and laughed with her younger cousins when they came over. But the subtle warnings, the strange impressions, the brief glimpses of people who didn't belong in her everyday life, all of them were quietly building a story that detectives would later try to reconstruct piece by piece. And it is this ordinary, beautiful, carefully observed life, the life of a child loved and watched, that makes what comes next so profound. Because it is not just a crime story. It is the story of lost time, of investigation, of questions that took years to answer, of a family whose hope never wavered. And it begins here, in the quiet folds of a San Francisco winter, with a girl named Sophia Chen walking through the fog, unaware of the eyes that followed her. The morning started like any other, with the chill of January clinging to the city. Sophia Chen's small apartment smelled faintly of toast and orange juice, the steam rising from her breakfast like a signal of normalcy. She kissed her mother lightly on the cheek and slipped into her coat, backpack snug against her shoulders, a familiar weight that felt like protection. Outside, the fog hung thick over the sidewalks, a white curtain that muted the city's noise. Cars passed slowly, tires hissing against wet asphalt, their headlights cutting through the mist. Sophia's route to school was routine, the streets she had walked countless times, feeling almost safe in their repetition. She noticed the familiar landmarks, the cracked brick of a corner wall, the graffiti on a lamppost she had tried to trace with chalk months before, the old bench where an elderly man sometimes slept. But even in this familiarity, there was a subtle unease, a shadow that moved in the fog, a figure that seemed too still for a passerby. A woman walked on the opposite sidewalk, coat buttoned tight, scarf pulled high. Sophia glimpsed her once, then again, the eyes meeting for just a fraction of a second. There was nothing threatening about the woman's posture, nothing overtly alarming, but something in that brief connection made Sophia quicken her pace. Later, investigators would review neighborhood accounts, neighbor statements, and footage from that day. They would note the woman, her presence, how carefully she followed the girl, step by step, always just out of reach, never approaching. School was its usual blur of hallways, lockers, and chatter. Sophia moved through the chaos effortlessly, her mind occupied with classes, drawings, the small details that children notice, like the way a janitor's broom paused slightly near the library, or how the fluorescent lights flickered above the science lab. No one else paid attention, but these small anomalies would later form a pattern, a puzzle investigators would struggle to assemble. Lunchtime brought her favorite sandwich and the seat near the window. Outside, the fog had lifted slightly, sunlight diffusing through a pale gray sky. She watched the street, observing the people passing, unaware that her attention was being mirrored by someone else. Across the street, the woman had positioned herself near a bus stop, coat wrapped tightly, a paper bag clutched in her hands. For hours, her presence was a quiet, unseen threat, cataloging the child's routine. After school, Sophia's friends walked in clumps toward their own homes. She took her usual shortcut through a quieter street, past townhouses and small shops, a route she knew intimately. The fog was denser now, muffling sounds and blending shadows. A delivery truck rumbled past, its engine drowning out the distant barking of a dog. And then, in the periphery of her vision, movement caught her attention. A figure slipping behind a tree, then appearing at a corner. Sophia hesitated, a small instinctive pause, nothing more than a subtle hesitation. The figure, a woman, seemed to be waiting, but for what? Sophia could not name it, could not place the instinct that pricked at the back of her neck. She continued walking, but not before a brief glance. The woman's scarf, dark and voluminous, obscured most of her face, yet something familiar in its shape, the way it moved, gave Sophia a fleeting sense of unease. At home, her mother Mei Chen was busy with dinner preparations. She glanced at the clock and realized Sophia had not returned yet. Normally, it was just a few minutes later than expected. Today, it stretched. Mei's unease began as a flicker, easily dismissed, but it grew as the minutes passed. The doorbell rang once, twice, nobody. Her heart raced as she stepped outside, scanning the foggy street. No Sophia. Neighbors reported seeing a child pass by, alone, and then nothing. Later, investigators would reconstruct those minutes with painstaking care, interviewing anyone who had glimpsed her, reviewing any photographic records from stores or school cameras. Each statement was a thread, some conflicting, some reinforcing a terrifying reality. Sophia had disappeared. Panic spread through the household quickly, a wave of disbelief and dread. Mei called her husband David, who rushed home from work, his face pale and eyes wide. The family scoured the streets, calling her name, looking under cars, through alleys, and behind buildings. The fog that had seemed innocuous now felt oppressive, as if hiding shadows too dark to confront. Within hours, the police were involved. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, taking statements from neighbors and classmates. Detectives arrived, their notebooks ready, their eyes scanning for inconsistencies, for clues that might hint at where Sophia had gone. The investigation began almost immediately, but even in these first frantic hours, there were gaps. Witnesses reported seeing a woman in a coat and scarf, but descriptions varied. The fog and the fleeting nature of the sighting complicated the picture. Detective Raymond Kwan, the lead investigator, recalled the case in later interviews. He remembered the initial scene as a canvas of uncertainty. No forced entry, no struggle, no clear indication of what had happened. It was like she had simply vanished, he would say. Nothing about that day gave us a clear narrative. Only fragments, only glimpses. His team began collecting evidence, photographs, neighborhood maps, descriptions, anything that might provide a starting point. Media coverage began the following morning. Posters with Sophia's smiling face appeared across the city. In stores, bus stops, and schools, the story was picked up by local news, journalists recounting the girl's life, her favorite hobbies, her parents' despair. But coverage was also a double-edged sword. Tips flooded in. Hundreds of calls, many false leads, some cruel pranks. Each call had to be traced, each tip investigated, slowing down what little time investigators had to follow legitimate leads. The first week became a blur of interviews, neighborhood searches, and family despair. Detectives explored all possibilities: accidental disappearance, kidnapping, a runaway scenario, even the rare but terrifying thought of stranger abduction. Every possibility had to be considered, weighed, and investigated. The threads of evidence were thin, fragile, and often contradictory. Days turned into weeks. The fog lifted from the city streets, revealing San Francisco's usual vibrancy. Yet for Sophia's family, the world remained dim, shadowed by uncertainty. Friends returned to school, but every hallway, every classroom seemed to echo with absence. The investigators continued their meticulous work, going over maps, retracing Sophia's steps, trying to find the invisible pattern that would explain her disappearance. It was in these first weeks that subtle clues began to emerge. A shopkeeper remembered a woman buying candy near the bus stop. A neighbor recalled a car parked unusually long on a side street. And a teacher mentioned seeing a child resembling Sophia outside school after dismissal. Each of these fragments, initially dismissed as minor, would later prove critical in constructing the trajectory that had taken Sophia from her home into someone else's care. Yet even with these pieces, the investigation was frustratingly slow. There were no CCTV cameras covering every corner, no digital breadcrumbs, no immediate forensic breakthroughs. Everything had to be built from memory, from observation, from painstaking interviews. Detective Kwan and his team worked around the clock, aware that in cases like this, time was the most cruel adversary. And so, the disappearance of Sophia Chen began not with a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, ordinary moments. The walk home through fog, a stranger's glance, the subtle shifts in routine that only later would reveal themselves as signs. The tension of those hours, captured in the foggy streets of San Francisco, would echo through every subsequent day, shaping an investigation that would span years, decades even, before the threads of her disappearance could finally be unraveled. By the time night fell over San Francisco, the city had settled into its usual rhythm, lights twinkling through the fog and casting soft halos on wet streets. But for the Chen family, night offered no solace. Their home, usually warm and familiar, felt impossibly empty. Sophia's small coat still hung by the door, untouched. Her backpack lay on the floor, the sketches inside spilling slightly, as if the world had paused the moment she disappeared. Mei Chen moved from room to room, calling her daughter's name softly, then louder, until her voice grew hoarse, each repetition echoing her rising panic. David Chen returned from work moments later, his face pale, hands shaking. "Where is she?" he asked, not as a question but as a plea to the universe itself. Within the hour, the local police were on the scene. Patrol cars lined the street, their red and blue lights reflecting off the fog like distant stars. Officers moved methodically, questioning neighbors, checking street corners, canvassing shops, and scanning alleyways. Detective Raymond Kwan arrived, his presence calm but commanding. He had seen disappearances before, and he knew the first hours were critical. "Time isn't on our side," he told his team quietly, almost as if speaking to the family would only deepen their despair. Every step mattered. Every overlooked detail could be the difference between hope and tragedy. The neighborhood was combed block by block. Officers checked trash bins, side alleys, parking lots. Every witness was interviewed. A neighbor recalled seeing a figure in a dark coat linger near the intersection where Sophia usually turned toward home. Another mentioned a car parked unusually long near a side street, its engine off, windows obscured. Each account was catalogued, yet none painted a full picture. The foggy memory of witnesses became a pattern detectives would later obsess over, trying to reconstruct a day that seemed, at first, perfectly ordinary. Inside the Chen home, investigators worked alongside grief-stricken parents, walking slowly through every room, noting the absence of struggle, the lack of forced entry. "She didn't run away," Detective Kwan said, almost to himself. It was a detail that shaped the investigation, guiding it away from theories of a runaway child towards something darker, something deliberate. The meticulous nature of this early investigation would lay the foundation for every breakthrough that followed, decades later. Local media quickly picked up the story. Sophia Chen's face appeared on television screens, in newspaper clippings, and on posters tacked to telephone poles. Reporters interviewed neighbors, teachers, and friends. Each story was filled with heartbreak, emphasizing her bright smile, her sketches, her laughter that once filled the Chen household. Tips poured in from across the city, some useful, most misleading. One caller claimed to have seen a girl matching Sophia's description near the waterfront. Another insisted a suspicious man had been lurking near a convenience store. Officers had to sift through hundreds of such reports, verifying every lead and discarding the rest. For Detective Kwan, the influx of information was both a blessing and a curse. Every detail might hold significance, but much of it led to dead ends. He spent long hours reviewing maps, retracing Sophia's steps, and consulting colleagues about previous cases. Forensic teams collected evidence from the Chen residence and surrounding streets, analyzing fingerprints, hair samples, and even footprints in the damp patches near the fog-laden sidewalks. Nothing conclusive emerged, but the thoroughness of these first steps ensured that every potential clue was preserved, no matter how small. Days stretched into weeks. Volunteers joined the search, neighbors posted flyers, and the city watched, collectively holding its breath. The family endured the public scrutiny that came with media attention. Mei Chen found herself explaining, again and again, what Sophia had been wearing, the last words she had said, the small habits that made her so unique. Every retelling was a fresh wound, yet it was necessary. Each detail could trigger recognition in someone who might have seen her. Investigators followed hundreds of leads. They interviewed classmates, bus drivers, shopkeepers, and anyone who might have noticed a strange car, a peculiar figure, or an unusual interaction. One officer remembered a child's sketch left behind at school, a simple drawing of a figure with a staff and a bag. It seemed innocent at first glance, but detectives catalogued it as a potential reference, a subconscious observation from Sophia herself. Later, when the case gained national attention, analysts would revisit every sketch, every note, every small clue with a more critical eye. As the search intensified, the foggy streets of San Francisco seemed to hold their secrets tightly. Detective Quan and his team became intimately familiar with every corner, every streetlight, every alley Sophia might have passed. They reviewed previous missing child cases, looking for patterns, for any indication that this disappearance fit a larger picture. At times, the team felt as though the city itself was conspiring to obscure the truth. And yet, amid the frustration, there was determination, a quiet, relentless focus on the possibility of finding her alive. The first breakthrough, however small, came from an overlooked witness, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who lived near the side street Sophia sometimes took. She remembered a woman in a long coat, staff pulled high, carrying a paper bag, walking with a child. "It didn't look right," she said later in an interview. The girl wasn't holding the woman's hand, but she wasn't alone either. The description was vague, fragmented, yet for the detectives, it was a spark. Every missing piece mattered, and this witness had provided a fragment that would later connect to larger patterns. As days passed, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. Detective Quan reached out to neighboring districts, checking for similar reports for sightings that might indicate movement across the city. Officers staked out potential locations, monitored bus routes, and interviewed people connected to the area's transient population. Social workers and child protection specialists were brought in to provide context, ensuring that every angle was examined. The emotional toll on the family was immense. Mei Chen struggled to eat, to sleep, her mind constantly replaying the moments before Sophia vanished. David Chen found himself obsessively checking every street, every corner, every person who looked even remotely out of place. Friends and relatives offered support, yet the void left by Sophia's absence was impossible to fill. Their grief became a daily companion, an unspoken tension that hung in the house like fog. Meanwhile, the police documentation grew, forming a labyrinth of notes, witness statements, maps, and photographs. Each lead was cross-referenced, timelines were constructed, and potential suspects were catalogued. Small inconsistencies were noted, minor details that might later serve as keys to unraveling the case. Detective Quan often remarked that the most critical aspects of an investigation were not always the big discoveries, but the tiny, almost invisible threads that, when pulled together, revealed the truth. Despite tireless effort, the days turned into weeks without a clear answer. The woman in the coat and scarf remained unidentified. Sightings were sporadic and inconclusive. Forensic evidence offered no definitive leads. The city moved on in its routine, but the Chen family and the detectives remained trapped in a liminal space, suspended between hope and despair, between the possibility of finding Sophia alive and the fear of the worst. Yet, even in this early stage, there were signs of progress. The meticulous work of canvassing the neighborhood, cataloging every observation, and preserving evidence ensured that nothing would be lost to time. These foundations, laid in the chaotic hours after her disappearance, would be crucial years later when technology, DNA analysis, and investigative persistence would finally converge to reveal the truth. In these first weeks, the disappearance of Sophia Chen was no longer just a missing child case. It was a puzzle, a narrative waiting to be reconstructed. Each witness, each street, each fleeting impression was a piece of that puzzle. Detective Quan and his team understood the stakes. The city had taken one of its own, a child with a bright mind and a gentle heart, and left only questions in the fog. And so the search continued, methodical, relentless, and haunted by the unspoken fear that time might be running out. 10 months had passed since Sophia Chen vanished. San Francisco moved on in small ways. Fog lifted and returned, buses ran their routes, children went to school. But for the Chen family, every day was suspended in time. May and David Chen lived in the quiet torment of absence, haunted by the memory of their daughter and the knowledge that she was somewhere, unseen. Detective Raymond Quan still visited regularly, leaning against the kitchen counter as May wrapped her trembling hands around a mug of tea. "We're not giving up," he said softly. "Every lead we've collected, every statement, every detail is still useful. Even now." May's voice was barely audible. "It's been 10 months, Detective. 10 months. Without a clue." David paced the floor, fists clenched. "There has to be something. We just haven't seen it yet. It has to be there." Quan nodded, pulling a map across the table, covered with pins, lines, and notes. "We've been following patterns. Sophia's routes, her friends' accounts, all neighborhood sightings. The same woman, the one in the scarf, keeps appearing, always near her path. She's careful, but patterns leave traces." The detective held up a worn note from a shopkeeper. "This man saw her buying candy near the corner where Sophia walks home. He didn't think anything at the time. But if we line it up with other sightings, the pieces start to form a pattern." May leaned forward, eyes wide. "You mean she's been near the same areas all along?" "Yes," Quan said, tracing a finger along the map. "It's subtle. A grocery run here, a walk through a park there. Each time a child is nearby, we think that child is Sophia." David's voice was low but urgent. "We've checked those streets 100 times. How did we miss her?" Quan shook his head. "She's clever, careful, and people forget small things. That's why we keep re-interviewing everyone. Even small memories matter." For months, investigators retraced every step Sophia had taken that fateful day. School corridors, bus stops, sidewalks, corner shops. Every neighbor was interviewed again, sometimes a third or fourth time. Officers checked abandoned lots, playgrounds, and areas near wooded patches on the city's outskirts. One afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor, approached Detective Quan during a canvassing session. "I remembered something," she said, her hands clutching her coat. "About 6 months ago, I saw a woman, long coat, scarf, carrying a child. She looked tense. I didn't think it meant anything, but now I'm not so sure." Quan leaned in, pen poised. "Can you describe the child?" Mrs. Alvarez swallowed, then whispered, "Small. 12, maybe. She had a backpack, and I swear, she looked like she didn't want to be there." Quan's eyes narrowed. "That's consistent with everything else. Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez. It may be minor, but it's important." The investigators followed this lead rigorously. They checked stores near that street, asking clerks if they remembered anyone matching the description, looking for patterns in shopping habits, movements, anything that could suggest where the woman might reside. Late one evening, Quan and a small team walked quietly along streets near the grandmother's home. "If she's nearby," Quan said under his breath, "she may be close to familiar routines, family visits, groceries, places she thinks no one will notice her." David and May, aware of this effort, were cautiously hopeful. May whispered as she held a photo of Sophia, "Please, let this be it." Then, a small clue emerged. A delivery driver remembered a woman buying groceries near the grandmother's apartment complex several months ago, her coat and scarf familiar, her child not quite walking freely. "I thought it was odd at the time," he told the detectives. She acted like she was afraid someone was watching, but she seemed normal otherwise." Quan reviewed every statement. The sightings, the delivery routes, the timing, the habits, they all began to converge. It painted a picture of a woman living on the edge of ordinary life, blending in during the day, but harboring a secret at night. The pattern pointed clearly to a small, secluded house on the outskirts of the city, close to the wooded area near the grandmother's apartment. May's voice trembled over the phone as Quan carefully explained the emerging lead. "Do you think she's there?" she asked. "I can't say for certain," Quan replied. "But it's the best lead we've had in months. We need to move cautiously, approach without tipping her off. Sophia's safety comes first." Over the next week, the detectives prepared carefully. They organized surveillance teams, noted the woman's routines, and waited for the right moment. Every precaution mattered. They didn't know her mental state, only that she had kept Sophia hidden for nearly a year. The night they moved in, fog blanketed the streets. Quan and officers approached the isolated house silently. The trees whispered in the wind, masking the crunch of their footsteps. From the window, a faint shadow moved, someone carrying a small child, careful and precise. Quan signaled to the team, "Hold positions. Wait for the window. Now." Officers entered quietly. Inside, the woman froze, startled but not violent. Sophia sat on a small chair, eyes wide, clutching a toy. The moment was tense, delicate. Detective Quan motioned for May and David to enter, allowing them to reunite with their daughter while officers maintained control. May knelt beside Sophia, tears spilling freely. "Oh, my baby, we found you. We've been looking for you every day." David hugged his daughter tightly. "You're finally safe. We've never stopped looking for you." Sophia, still frightened, clung to her parents. I thought no one would find me," she whispered. Detective Quan observed the reunion quietly. The months of surveillance, interviews, and careful detective work had led to this moment. The woman, whose own child had died years earlier, had kept Sophia hidden, motivated by grief and mental instability. She was taken into custody, treated carefully by officers trained to handle delicate situations, and her home was searched for additional evidence. In the aftermath, the Chen family spent hours together, catching up on months of absence, holding each other, speaking softly, recounting stories, and simply being together. Detective Quan stayed nearby, watching over the process, ensuring Sophia was safe, and preparing the case for prosecution. The 10-month investigation had relied on careful observation, witness recollection, and pattern analysis. No modern DNA technology, no improbable coincidences. Every step was grounded in realistic 1995 police work, canvassing, interviews, physical clues, and logical deduction. Months of meticulous effort finally converged in a breakthrough that brought Sophia home. As May held her daughter that night, Quan quietly remarked to his partner, "Sometimes it's the small things that matter most, the details everyone else overlooks. And sometimes, patience is everything." The night air was thick with fog, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant city lights. Detective Raymond Quan crouched behind a low hedge, surveying the small secluded house at the edge of the wooded area. Months of careful investigation, countless witness interviews, and the tireless dedication of the Chen family had led them here. Now, finally, the moment of truth had arrived. "Teams in position," whispered Officer Mills into the radio. His voice was steady, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every detective present knew that a single misstep could endanger the child. Quan nodded subtly. "Remember, the priority is her safety. Approach carefully. No sudden movements." Inside the house, the woman moved quietly, unaware of the police outside. The home was tidy but sparse, organized in a way that suggested someone trying to impose order on a chaotic world. A small bed, a few toys, books neatly stacked on a low shelf. All of it indicated someone clinging to memories and routines. Sophia sat on the floor near a window, clutching a stuffed animal. Her eyes widened as she noticed shadows moving past the glass. Fear tightened her chest. She had been alone with this woman for 10 long months, uncertain whether the world outside would ever return. At that moment, May and David Chen, led carefully by officers, arrived quietly to witness the reunion they had prayed for every day for nearly a year. May's voice trembled as she whispered, "Sophia, it's Mommy, it's Daddy." The child's eyes filled with tears. "Mom? Dad?" Her voice was small, fragile, a mixture of relief and disbelief. David knelt beside her, enveloping her in his arms. "We've been looking for you every day, baby, every single day." Sophia clung to her parents, her small body shaking. I didn't know if you'd come," she admitted, her words barely audible. Detective Quan entered cautiously, keeping an eye on the woman, who froze as the reality of her situation sank in. She had kept the child for months, motivated by grief and mental instability after the loss of her own daughter. Her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and fear, knowing that the authorities had finally found her. "Ma'am," Quan said gently, but firmly, "Please stay calm. We just want to make sure the child is safe." The woman nodded silently, her hands shaking. It was clear she wasn't dangerous in a violent sense, but her obsession and mental state had led to the crime. Officers quickly and carefully secured the scene, keeping the child and her parents together while escorting the woman into custody. May held Sophia close, stroking her hair. "You're safe now, baby. Safe." Sophia leaned into her mother, whispering, "I thought I'd never see you again." David brushed tears from her face. "You're home now. That's what matters." Once the initial shock subsided, Quan debriefed his team. "Good work, everyone. Every interview, every lead, every detail kept this case alive. That's what brought us here. 10 months of careful observation, patience, and persistence saved her." Back at the Chen home, the family sat together, overwhelmed by the weight of relief and disbelief. Sophia, still in shock, slowly began to speak about her time with the woman. She described the routines, the toys, the careful meals, and the quiet fear she had lived under. May listened intently, holding her daughter as David took notes of every detail, understanding that recounting these months would help law enforcement piece together the full picture. I didn't want to be there," Sophia admitted softly. "But she said she would take care of me. She wanted me to be her daughter." May's voice was steady but thick with emotion. "You are our daughter, Sophia. Always. We've never stopped looking for you." The woman, sitting quietly in the back of the police car, remained silent. Her eyes reflected the sorrow of a parent who had lost a child, yet her actions had taken another's child away. Officers understood that her mental instability was a key factor, but the law would hold her accountable for kidnapping. In the following days, investigators catalogued every item in her home, documenting patterns of behavior, supplies, and the timeline that Sophia had endured. Neighborhood interviews confirmed sightings matching the woman's routine, reinforcing the detectives' careful mapping of her movements. Every detail added clarity to the months-long mystery, solidifying the case for prosecution. The media coverage was intense but respectful, emphasizing Sophia's safe return rather than sensationalizing the crime. Reporters interviewed the family and Detective Quan, highlighting the meticulous work that led to the rescue. Quan, ever modest, deflected praise. "It wasn't one person," he said. "It was months of coordinated work and the persistence of a family who refused to give up. That's what matters." Court proceedings followed shortly after, with the woman formally charged with kidnapping. The trial revealed the complexity of her motives: grief, mental instability, and obsession. Expert testimony described her psychological state, painting a portrait of someone consumed by loss but still responsible for her actions. May and David Chen attended every hearing, often holding Sophia close in the courtroom. Their presence underscored the human cost of the crime and the triumph of perseverance. Witnesses testified to the family's tireless search, the detective work, and the community's efforts to locate Sophia. Each detail reinforced the months-long dedication that brought the child home. When the verdict came, the Chen family felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and closure. Justice had been served, yet the psychological scars of 10 months apart would linger. Still, Sophia's return marked a turning point. A restoration of family, a reclamation of childhood, and a reminder that persistence, careful observation, and hope can prevail even against the darkest of circumstances. In the quiet that followed, Quan reflected on the case. 10 months is a long time, he said to his partner, but every lead, every small observation mattered. This is how cases are solved, step by step, patiently, logically. It's never instant, it's never easy, but in the end, it works. The Chen family began the slow process of healing. Sophia returned to school, her days filled with cautious normalcy. The trauma remained, but it was tempered by safety, love, and a renewed sense of family unity. May often held Sophia at night, whispering, "We'll never let you go again." David, sitting quietly beside them, added, "We've learned patience, perseverance, and the power of never giving up. And now, we have our daughter back." The city itself, unaware of the intricate detective work unfolding in its neighborhoods, carried on. But for the Chen family, for Detective Quan, and for every officer who had spent months chasing fragments of a story, that foggy night marked the end of a harrowing chapter and the return of a child who had been lost but never forgotten. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, the faint tang of dust, and the nervous energy of anticipation. Months of investigation had culminated in this moment, a formal reckoning for the woman who had kept Sophia Chen hidden for 10 long months. For May and David Chen, every step into the building felt heavy, each footfall echoing the anxiety and hope that had carried them through nearly a year of uncertainty. Detective Raymond Kwan had come to testify, but he knew his role was secondary to the emotional weight carried by Sophia's family. He quietly observed as May and David took seats near the front. Sophia perched on her mother's lap, clutching a small notebook she had begun using again, her drawings meticulous, almost therapeutic. The judge entered, the gavel tapping sharply to signal the beginning of proceedings. The air seemed to tighten, anticipation gripping everyone in the room. The prosecution opened with a calm, factual summary. This case represents not only a violation of law, but a profound disruption of a child's life and a family's existence. The defendant, motivated by personal grief and mental instability, removed a 12-year-old girl from her home, concealing her for 10 months. Evidence, witness testimony, and meticulous investigation have allowed law enforcement to locate the child and secure her safety. May's hands trembled slightly, tightening around Sophia's small ones. "It's been so long," she whispered. "I can't believe this day is finally here." The defense attorney spoke next, careful and measured. "While the acts of my client are undeniable, they stem from profound grief and a disturbed mental state. The loss of her own child has left her psychologically impaired. While she must be held accountable, the court must consider the circumstances surrounding these actions." Detective Kwan was called to testify. His voice was calm but firm as he described the months of investigation. "We relied on eyewitness accounts, neighborhood canvassing, and careful observation of patterns to locate the child. There were no technological shortcuts. This was painstaking work that required patience and attention to detail. Every detail mattered, from the direction the woman walked with the child, to the stores she visited, to the schedule she maintained. Each piece of information allowed us to reconstruct the timeline and ultimately locate the child safely." A hush fell as Kwan recounted the night of the rescue. The child was found unharmed, frightened, but otherwise safe. The reunion with her parents confirmed the success of the investigation and the importance of meticulous detective work. The perpetrator was taken into custody without incident. The case demonstrates that thorough investigative practices, combined with persistence and careful attention to detail, can bring resolution even in long and complex situations. The prosecution called witnesses, store clerks, neighbors, delivery personnel, each confirming small observations that had been crucial to locating Sophia. "I remembered seeing the woman buy candy," one clerk testified. "At the time, it seemed normal, but later I realized she had a child with her who looked not quite comfortable being there." Sophia's grandmother, present in the courtroom, gave a quiet statement. "I worried every day," she said, voice shaking. "But the police never gave up, and I knew my granddaughter was out there somewhere. I have faith that she would come home." When May was asked to speak, she rose slowly, drawing a deep breath. 10 months ago, our lives were turned upside down. We searched, we hoped, we cried, and sometimes we nearly gave up. But we never stopped believing that Sophia would come home. Today, she is here, and we thank everyone who helped bring her back to us." Her voice wavered, tears spilling freely. Sophia leaned against her mother, listening, her own small hands gripping her mother's tightly. David spoke next, his tone steady but emotional. "This trial is not just about punishment. It's about understanding, about justice, and about closure. We recognize the pain that led to this, but the law exists to protect children. Our daughter was returned to us, and we will do everything to ensure she heals from the trauma she endured." The defense attempted to argue the woman's mental instability, presenting psychological evaluations. "The defendant suffered a devastating loss years ago," the psychologist testified. "Her actions, while criminal, were influenced heavily by grief, depression, and emotional instability. This must be considered in sentencing." The judge listened attentively, weighing every word. After deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The woman was found guilty of child abduction and illegal confinement, with the court acknowledging her mental instability as a mitigating factor. She was sentenced to a period of incarceration combined with psychiatric treatment, reflecting both accountability and the recognition of her psychological condition. As the gavel struck, May and David held Sophia close. Relief washed over them, mingling with the deep exhaustion that had accumulated over 10 months. "It's finally over," May whispered. "We can begin to heal." Detective Kwan lingered, watching the family. "They don't fully realize," he said to a colleague, "how much courage it took to hold on, to believe, to live in hope every single day. This is more than a case, it's proof that persistence matters." In the following weeks, Sophia returned to school, her routine gradually resuming. She carried with her a quiet resilience, the trauma of the abduction tempered by the love and patience of her parents. May and David ensured she had support from counselors, teachers, and close friends, guiding her gently back into normalcy. The woman, meanwhile, entered the correctional system where she received mental health treatment. The court's decision reflected a balance between justice and compassion, aiming to prevent further harm while acknowledging the tragedy that had shaped her actions. Neighborhoods that had been quietly observant over the months returned to their routines. Yet the story lingered in whispered recollections. Store clerks remembered the small clues they had once dismissed. Neighbors reflected on the quiet patterns they had observed. And within the Chen family, a newfound vigilance and appreciation for ordinary moments emerged, a recognition of how fragile life could be and how tenacity could restore it. Detective Kwan remained a steady presence, quietly noting the lessons of the case. "Investigations are never just about evidence," he said. "They're about people, about details, about understanding the world in a way that allows you to see what others overlook. That's how we solved this case. That's how we saved a child." The Chen family, though forever changed, embraced the future with cautious hope. Sophia's laughter gradually returned to the home, small smiles brightening moments of quiet routine. Every day together became a celebration of survival, of persistence, and of the human spirit's ability to endure and overcome. And in the city that had nearly forgotten their struggle, the story of Sophia Chen became a quiet testament to the power of observation, patience, and unwavering love. A reminder that even in the darkest months, light could return, and justice could prevail. The months following the trial were quiet, almost deceptively so. For the Chen family, quiet was a gift they had not known they could take for granted. Sophia returned to school, her backpack neatly packed, her notebooks full of carefully drawn sketches. But beyond the normalcy of routine, there lingered the memory of 10 months of fear, uncertainty, and a strange, fragile hope that had carried her parents through each day. May often watched her daughter from the doorway, smiling softly at small victories, the way Sophia laughed with her friends at the playground, the way she paused thoughtfully before answering a question in class, the subtle confidence returning to her posture. "She's healing," May whispered to David one evening as they sat together in the quiet of their living room. "Slowly, but she's healing." David nodded, his hand resting on hers. "It's remarkable how resilient she is. 10 months, and yet here she is, finding her way back to herself." Detective Raymond Kwan visited occasionally, not as an officer, but as someone who had been part of the story from the beginning. Each visit was a reminder of the meticulous work, the patience, and the relentless pursuit of truth that had brought Sophia home. "It wasn't just investigation," Kwan said during one visit, sitting across from the family at their kitchen table. "It was perseverance, observation, and believing that no detail is too small to matter. That's how we found her." May nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "And your team, your dedication, it gave us hope when we had none." Kwan gave a small smile. "The hope was always yours. We just helped trace the threads." The story of Sophia Chen gradually became part of the fabric of the neighborhood, quietly acknowledged in conversations among neighbors, school staff, and the families who had watched alongside the Chens throughout the months. The woman who had taken Sophia was serving her sentence, her grief acknowledged, but her accountability ensured. It was a delicate balance of justice and understanding, a reflection of a community navigating the complexities of human behavior, tragedy, and morality. For Sophia, the world was slowly regaining its contours. She explored the small details she had missed, the simple pleasures of everyday life, the crisp taste of fresh fruit, the warmth of a classroom full of friends, the embrace of parents who had never stopped searching. Each moment became a testament to survival and a reclaiming of the innocence that had been threatened but never completely lost. One evening, the family sat together on the porch, the city's fog curling around the edges of their quiet block. Sophia leaned against her mother, watching the soft orange glow of streetlights reflected in puddles from a light rain. "Mom," she whispered, "I feel safe now." May kissed her forehead, holding her close. "Always, my love. We'll never let anything take that away from you again." David added, "And we've learned how much we can endure. 10 months showed us fear, heartbreak, and uncertainty, but it also showed us resilience, hope, and the depth of family love." Detective Kwan, standing at the edge of the porch, the buff reflected silently on the case. The woman's actions had been born of grief, an understandable yet criminal response to loss. But it was the Chen's perseverance, the officer's observation, and the careful piecing together of clues that restored balance. In the realm of crime and justice, logic, patience, and human connection had triumphed over chaos. As months turned into a year, Sophia thrived. Counseling sessions, school support, and patient guidance helped her rebuild trust, confidence, and a sense of security. May and David remained vigilant, but they also embraced joy in small doses, a shared meal, a school performance, a quiet evening together. Every moment was a victory, a reclaiming of time stolen by fear and uncertainty. The neighborhood, once marked by subtle whispers of a missing child, carried on its routines, now quietly aware of the fragility and resilience woven into daily life. Teachers recounted Sophia's return, emphasizing patience and support. Neighbors reflected on the small details they had observed, recognizing the power of community vigilance. And the story of the case, while intense and harrowing, became a reminder of human perseverance and careful observation. In private, May often looked at photographs taken during Sophia's first week back home, her smile tentative, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "We were lucky," she said to David one night. "Not everyone gets this ending." David, squeezing her hand, nodded. "It's not luck. It's persistence, it's hope, and it's love. That's what brought her back to us." For Detective Kwan, the legacy of the case was clear. Every detail mattered. Every witness, every sketch, every small observation contributed to restoring a life, to solving a puzzle that could have remained forever incomplete. "In this line of work," he told a colleague quietly, "sometimes it's not the flashy breakthroughs that save a life. It's the slow, patient gathering of truth and never letting go." Sophia's laughter gradually returned to the home, echoing softly through the halls. Each giggle, each bright-eyed glance, each careful step toward normalcy was a testament to her strength, to the dedication of those who sought her, and to the enduring power of hope. Years later, the Chen family would recall the case not only as a moment of terror, but as a lesson in patience, resilience, and the deep bonds of family. The city moved on, as cities do, but in the Chen home, the story of 10 months' absence and the careful unraveling of a hidden crime remained vivid. A story of fear, love, justice, and ultimately the restoration of a life stolen but returned. As the sun dipped below the foggy horizon, Sophia ran ahead in the yard, her parents close behind. Detective Kwan, visiting briefly, watched from a distance, satisfied that the family he had helped protect was whole once more. "This," he thought, "is why we do this work. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for moments like this, for lives returned, for hope realized." And in that quiet evening glow, with the city's hum in the distance and the warmth of family surrounding her, Sophia Chen's story, though born of fear and uncertainty, ended with a truth far greater than darkness, that even in the harshest trials, love, perseverance, and patience can prevail.